Hello everyone. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Let me know in the comments. If you enjoy our stories, please like the video and subscribe for more. And now, turn off the lights, close your eyes, and relax. I was never the type to pick up hitchhikers, not out of fear or distrust, but out of habit. When you drive at night on secondary roads for years, you end up developing a series of routines that become unwritten rules, and one of mine was not opening the door to strangers after dark. I am 46 years old and work as an industrial maintenance technician. My job requires me to travel frequently to factories and processing plants scattered throughout the province, many of them in industrial parks far from urban centers, reachable only by rural roads with no shoulders and no lighting. I have driven at night hundreds of times, thousands probably. I have seen deer cross the road 10 meters from my hood. I have dodged wild boars appearing out of nowhere like hairy shadows with glowing eyes. I have changed flat tires at 2 in the morning on road shoulders where no one passed for hours. I was never afraid of the night or the road. They were my territory, my natural space, the place where I felt more comfortable than in my own home. That changed one night in November when rain and compassion made me break my own rule. It was raining with an intensity that turned the windshield into a curtain of water, even with the wipers at full speed. The car's heater barely worked, and the condensation built up on the windows with a sticky insistence that forced me to wipe the inside with my jacket sleeve every few minutes. I had been driving for over 3 hours from a work meeting in an inland city, and still had at least 2 more to go before reaching home. The radio had not picked up any station for a while, and the silence inside the car, broken only by the drumming of rain against the metal and the monotonous hum of the wipers, was beginning to weigh on me like uncomfortable company that cannot be dismissed. The dashboard clock showed 10:30 at night, and the road was so empty that I had gone over 20 minutes without seeing another pair of headlights coming toward me or going in my direction. I was alone on a ribbon of wet asphalt that the rain made shine like the skin of a black, endless animal. I saw him on the right shoulder, illuminated for half a second by the headlights. A figure standing by the road, arm extended, thumb up, soaked from head to toe. He carried no umbrella, no raincoat, nothing protecting him from the water, only a dark jacket clinging to his body and trousers dripping onto the asphalt, forming a puddle at his feet that the headlights turned into a tiny mirror before the darkness swallowed everything. I passed by out of inertia, as I always did, and left him behind in less than a second. But something made me look in the rearview mirror. The figure was still there, growing smaller in the mirror's reflection, motionless under the rain, arm extended toward an empty road down which no one else would pass at that hour. It was nearly 11 at night. The outside temperature read 4 degrees on the dashboard screen. There were no villages for several kilometers in any direction, and the rain showed no sign of letting up. I braked. I do not know why. Perhaps it was the rain, or the cold, or the image of that man alone in the middle of nowhere, at an hour when no one should be standing by a road under a storm. Perhaps it was that I had been silent for so many hours that part of me needed the presence of another human being, even if it was a stranger who would not say a single word the whole trip. The fact is I braked, put on my right turn signal, and reversed along the shoulder until I was level with him. I lowered the passenger window a few centimeters, just enough for a gust of cold air and raindrops to enter, and gestured with my hand for him to approach. The man walked toward the car with slow steps that seemed unhurried, despite the storm beating down on him. Each step he took raised a small fan of water from the flooded asphalt, glistening for an instant under the red light of the brake lights before disappearing. When he reached the window, I saw his face for the first time. He was a man in his mid-40s, dark hair plastered to his forehead by water. Ordinary features with nothing striking or threatening about them. He had dark eyes and a neutral expression, neither grateful, nor angry, nor frightened, just neutral, like the face of someone waiting for something they know will arrive sooner or later, and who is in no hurry because time means nothing to them. I asked where he was going. He did not answer. I asked if he needed a ride to a village. He did not answer. He stood looking at me through the gap in the window with those dark eyes that the rain made shine like wet stones in a riverbed, and he did not say a single word. I should have rolled up the window and kept driving. That is what anyone with a minimum of common sense would have done at 11 at night on a deserted road under a storm. But there was something about this man that did not inspire fear so much as a kind of compassionate discomfort. The feeling that leaving him there in the rain and cold would be an act of cruelty that would weigh on me for the rest of the trip and for many nights after. I unlocked the doors and told him to get in, that I would take him to the next village. He walked around the back of the car, passing in front of the taillights that silhouetted him like a dark shape against the curtain of rain, and opened the rear door. Not the passenger door, which was closest and what anyone would have chosen, but the rear door on the driver's side. He sat behind me, in the seat directly at my back, the only place in the car from which I could not see him without turning completely around or using the interior rearview mirror. He closed the door with a soft thud barely audible above the noise of rain on the car roof. I started driving and merged back onto the road. Through the interior rearview mirror, I saw him sitting with his back straight and his hands on his knees, staring forward without fixing his gaze on anything specific, as if what lay beyond the windshield did not interest him or was not visible to him. Water dripped from his hair and jacket, soaking the seat upholstery with a steady dripping that formed an irregular rhythm, like a second clock out of sync with the one on the dashboard. I tried to make conversation. I asked his name. Silence. I asked where he was coming from. Silence. I asked if he was feeling all right, if he needed me to take him to a hospital or a police station or anywhere where they could help him. The same dense, complete silence, as if my words sank into an absorbent material before reaching his ears. I thought perhaps he was in shock, or had some speech impediment, or was one of those types who prefer not to talk to strangers under any circumstances. I stopped trying and focused on the road and the sound of the rain, which suddenly seemed less bothersome than the silence of my passenger. We drove like that for over an hour. The rain did not let up. The kilometers passed marked by the odometer and nothing else, because the landscape beyond the windows was a uniform black mass that the rain turned into something liquid and formless, as if the world outside the car were dissolving. The silence inside the cabin had become something that occupied space, a presence among the seats, a third invisible passenger weighing more than the man sitting behind me. Every so often I glanced in the rearview mirror to check he was still there. He was always in the exact same posture, back straight, hands on his knees, gaze fixed on some point on the back of my seat. He did not move. He did not cough. He did not adjust his wet clothes or push his hair from his face. He did not cross his legs or shift his weight from one side to the other, or look out the window like any passenger would do wanting to know where they were going. At one point, the road passed under a bridge with emergency lights on, and the orange brightness came through the windows for 2 or 3 seconds. I saw his reflection in the rear side window, the same image as in the mirror but from a different angle. And for some reason, that second point of view made something shrink inside my chest. Because in that reflection, I saw that his eyes were not looking at the back of my seat. They were looking at the rearview mirror. They were looking at me through the mirror with the same fixity with which I was looking at him. I began to feel a discomfort that grew with each kilometer, like a temperature rising slowly but steadily. It was not fear yet, but it was close enough that my body could not tell the difference. It was the sensation of having something at my back that I could not control, predict, or see clearly. Something too still to be natural, too silent to be a body with blood and lungs and needs. The muscles in my neck tightened until they formed a painful knot at the base of my skull. My jaw clenched without my noticing. My hands gripped the steering wheel with a force unnecessary for driving straight on a road in the rain. My whole body was reacting to a threat my rational mind refused to acknowledge, because there were no visible reasons for fear. It was just a wet man sitting in the back seat of my car. That was all. That had to be all. At 12:30 at night, I saw the lights of a gas station in the distance, a rectangle of white light floating in the darkness like a raft in the middle of a black ocean. I slowed down and told my passenger I was going to stop for a moment, that if he wanted he could buy something hot at the store, or stay there if he preferred, and wait for someone else to pick him up in daylight. He did not answer. I parked next to one of the pumps under the metal canopy that sheltered me from the rain, and got out of the car. The cold night air hit my face, and I was grateful for it because it cleared my head abruptly, as if someone had opened a window in a room where the air had been stagnating for hours, with something that was not just condensation, but something thicker and harder to name. I walked to the gas station store, bought a coffee in a cardboard cup and a sandwich wrapped in plastic, and returned to the car intending to offer something warm to my passenger. The back seat was empty. The door was still closed. The lock was still engaged from the inside. There were no signs that anyone had opened it from inside or outside. There were no wet footprints on the concrete around the car, no watermarks leading away in any direction, no trace of a person walking in the rain to anywhere. I asked the gas station attendant, a young man reading a magazine behind the counter, if he had seen anyone get out of my car while I was inside the store. He looked at me strangely and said he had not seen anyone, that my car had been parked alone the whole time, and from the cash register window the pumps were clearly visible. I went back to the car with a knot in my throat that I could not swallow. The seat where my passenger had sat was soaked, a dark damp patch in the exact shape of a body sitting upright with hands on knees. A water mold reproducing a posture I already had etched in my memory with the precision of a photograph. And in the center of the seat, where his thighs would have been, there was something that had not been there before. A wristwatch, analog with a dark brown leather strap worn from years of use, and a round face with Roman numerals barely distinguishable under the gas station lights. The hands were stopped. They showed 11:15, the exact time I had picked him up on the road shoulder. I stood beside the car under the white gas station lights, looking at the watch on the wet seat. For a time I could not calculate. My hands were shaking, and it was not from the cold. I picked up the watch. It was ice cold, much colder than an object should be that someone had just worn on their wrist for over an hour inside a car with the heater on. I put it in the glove compartment without quite knowing why I did not throw it in the gas station trash can, got in the car, and drove home without turning on the radio, without looking in the rearview mirror a single time, without thinking of anything except the white dashed line down the center of the road, shining under the headlights like a seam, holding together a world that was beginning to unravel at the edges. I arrived home after 2 in the morning. I showered with water so hot it reddened the skin on my shoulders. I went to bed and slept without dreaming, which was a relief I did not appreciate enough because I still did not know what awaited me. The next morning, with daylight filtering through the blinds and hot coffee in my hands, what had happened the night before began to lose consistency, growing soft and diffuse like the edges of a memory you are not sure was real or dreamed. A strange hitchhiker who got out of the car while I was at the gas station and left his watch forgotten on the seat. That was all. The store attendant could have been distracted by his magazine and not seen him leave. Car doors sometimes do strange things with automatic locks. The stain on the seat was rainwater the man had on his wet clothes. Everything had an explanation if one wanted to find it. And I wanted to find it with a desperation I mistook for common sense. I put the watch in the nightstand drawer, closed the drawer, and decided not to think about it again. The next night I drove was a Sunday a week later. I had to check equipment at a factory that operated on the night shift, so I left home at 9 and took the highway south. It was a clear, cold night, no rain, with a nearly full moon bathing the fields in a bluish white that gave them an unreal appearance, as if the whole world were covered in a thin film of ice reflecting the light from the sky. I drove peacefully for an hour listening to an instrumental music station until the highway lanes narrowed and gave way to a 2-lane rural road with dirt shoulders and no streetlights. I saw him 20 minutes after leaving the highway, standing on the right shoulder, arm extended, thumb raised toward the night sky. The same dark jacket, the same trousers, the same hair plastered to his forehead, even though it was not raining that night and had not rained for days, and the air was dry and clean as the inside of a bone. The same rigid posture, the same absolute stillness, the same neutral expression illuminated for half a second by the headlights before disappearing into the darkness of the rearview mirror, like an image erased from a screen. I felt a chill run from the back of my neck down to the base of my spine, like an icy finger tracing each vertebra one by one. I pressed the accelerator and did not look back. I arrived at the factory with my hands sweating on the steering wheel and my heart beating at a rhythm that did not match any physical exertion. I told myself it was not the same man. That there are hitchhikers on roads, it is common. That 2 different people can wear similar clothes and look alike when you see them at night from a moving car at 90 kilometers per hour. I repeated it so many times during that shift that I almost managed to believe it. 3 days later, I drove at night again, and I saw him, on a different road, over 120 kilometers from the previous point. The same figure, the same posture, the same arm extended with thumb pointing at the black sky. This time he was next to a traffic sign warning of a dangerous curve, and my headlights illuminated him for something over a second because I slowed down to take the curve, long enough to see his face with a clarity that robbed me of sleep for the next 3 nights. The same face, the same dark eyes looking at me with that expression that was neither anger nor pleading nor anything I could name. An expression of infinite waiting, as if he knew I was going to pass that way and only wanted me to see him, to know he was still there, that he had not forgotten me, nor I should forget him. From that night on, I saw him every time I drove after dark. It did not matter the road, the direction, the distance traveled. I could be on a highway lit with sodium streetlights or on a dirt track where the headlights were the only light for kilometers. It could be 9 at night or 3 in the morning. He was always there, standing on the shoulder, arm raised, gaze fixed on my car as if he could identify it among all others before it arrived. Sometimes he appeared only once during the whole journey. Other times I saw him 3 or 4 times at different points on the same road, as if he moved ahead and waited for me further on every few kilometers, as if the distance between appearances was a measure of something I did not understand but that he controlled. He never moved when I passed. He never ran after the car. He never did anything but stand with his arm extended and his thumb pointing upward, asking for something I had already given him once and did not intend to give him ever again. I reorganized my entire life around daylight. I left at dawn and returned before sunset. If a meeting ran late, I slept in a hotel and waited until morning. I refused night work I would have accepted without thinking before. I invented night vision problems my ophthalmologist had never diagnosed. I stopped going out to dinner with friends because the drive home was after dark. I stopped going to the movies because shows ended after sunset. I stopped grocery shopping in the afternoon because in winter it got dark at 6, and the supermarket was a 15-minute drive away. My world shrank to fit only within daylight hours, and everything outside that schedule ceased to exist for me, as if someone had cut those hours from the day with scissors and thrown them away. It worked for 3 weeks. 3 weeks in which I did not see him, and in which I began to recover something resembling normality. I slept better. I ate without my stomach closing up. I stopped checking the rearview mirror every 10 seconds when driving during the day. I stopped turning on all the lights in the house at dusk. The watch remained in the nightstand drawer and I had stopped opening it to check, though sometimes, in the quietest hours of the early morning, I thought I heard a ticking coming from inside the furniture. A sound that should not exist because the hands of that watch had been stopped since the night I found it. But one afternoon in early December, something destroyed my system. I was returning from a technical visit when an accident closed the main road and the detour took me into a labyrinth of rural roads with poor signage and curves that followed no logic. The sun set at 5:30. By 6, I was driving in complete darkness on a road I did not recognize, with no phone signal and no idea how many kilometers I was from the nearest village. I felt the control I had built over 3 weeks crack like a layer of ice under a weight that had always been there, waiting for the precise moment to break it. I saw him at 6:15, on the left shoulder this time, standing with his arm extended toward my lane, as if he had been waiting for me to come this specific way on this specific road at this specific time. The headlights illuminated him from the front and I could see every detail with a new and terrible clarity. The dark jacket with a button hanging by a thread on the chest, the wet trousers even though it had not rained in days, the hair plastered to his forehead as if he had just come out from underwater, or as if it had never dried since that first November night. And the eyes. The dark eyes looking at me with a fixity that did not belong to anything living, that did not have the natural fluctuation of a human gaze, that did not blink or move or reflect the headlights the way real eyes should. I drove past with my heart pounding against my ribs. A kilometer later, I saw him again on the right shoulder. 2 kilometers later on the left, then on the right, then on the left, each appearance closer to the asphalt line, each time with his arm more extended toward the car. On one of the last appearances, his hand was so close it would have brushed the side mirror, if I had not instinctively swerved toward the opposite lane. And in that fraction of a second when the headlights caught his face full on from less than a meter away, I saw something I had not seen before. His lips were moving, not to speak, to smile. A slow, wide smile that did not reach his eyes because his eyes remained two dark, fixed holes that did not belong to any human face. I drove those last kilometers reciting aloud the names of the streets in my neighborhood, my nephew's birthdays, the provincial capitals I learned in school, anything to keep my mind anchored to a world that made sense, had rules and explanations for everything. When I found a village with a gas station open, I parked under the canopy lights and sat inside the car for 2 hours without moving, watching the moths hitting the fluorescent tubes as if they were the only proof that the world was still functioning normally on the other side of the windshield. 4 months have passed since that night. I have not driven after dark again. I have refused jobs. I have lost clients who had been with me for years. My boss has warned me twice that he will let me go if I do not recover the availability I had before. But I cannot explain to him what is happening to me. I cannot explain it to anyone without them thinking I need help from someone who has nothing to do with industrial mechanics. The watch is still in the nightstand drawer. I opened it last week for the first time in a long while. The hands still show 11:15. They have not moved a second in all these months. But the leather strap is more worn than when I found it, with the wear marks a wrist leaves from wearing a watch every day for years, as if someone had been using it while I was not looking. And on the back of the case, engraved in letters so small I needed a magnifying glass to read them, I found a name. My name, engraved in the metal with fine, precise calligraphy, the same with which dedications are engraved on gifts that someone wants you to keep forever. Last night I fell asleep on the sofa with the television on. I woke at 3 in the morning with the screen black, and the house in a silence that was not normal. A silence that had weight and texture, as if someone had absorbed all the night noises from the street and the building and the pipes, and stored them somewhere where they could not disturb whatever was out there waiting. I went to the kitchen to drink water, and passing the living room window facing the street, I looked outside without thinking. Out of that reflex, we all have to check that the outside world is still there when we wake at odd hours. He was there, standing on the sidewalk across the street under the lamppost lighting the crosswalk, arm extended and thumb raised toward my window. The same soaked dark jacket, the same wet hair plastered to his forehead, the same dark eyes that did not blink looking at me through the glass with a patience that had nothing human about it, and everything inevitable, and the same smile I had seen on the road that last night in December, slow and wide and empty. The smile of something that knows in the end it always gets what it came for, because it has all the time in the world and I do not. He no longer needed a road. He no longer needed me to drive at night to find me. He had learned where I live. I found the first mention of the lake on a forum about unexplained phenomena, one I had been browsing for years without much conviction, more for entertainment than out of genuine belief in what people posted on those kinds of pages. It was a thread with few replies, written by a user with no profile picture and no previous posting history, which usually meant the account had been created just to post that message and would probably never be used again. The text was brief and written with a dryness that did not match the usual tone of mystery forums, where people tend to embellish their experiences with dramatic details and flashy phrases to get more responses and more attention. This user did not embellish anything. He described a mountain lake in an inland area where he had gone hiking one autumn weekend. He said the lake was surrounded by forest on 3 sides and a rock wall on the 4th. And the water was so dark it looked black, even though when you scooped it up in your hands, it was transparent. He said he leaned over the edge of the lake to drink, and what he saw on the water's surface was not his reflection. It was a face that looked like his but was not doing what he was doing. He was leaning toward the water, and the face in the reflection was upright, looking at him from below with eyes that were open in a way his were not. He said he pulled back from the water, and the face in the reflection did not pull back with him but stayed where it was, looking up from beneath the surface with an expression that was not his, and that did not change when he stepped back 3 paces, and then 5, and then 10, until the distance made the details impossible to make out, but he could still see the pale blur of something that remained there, floating beneath the surface, looking at the sky with the eyes of someone waiting. The thread had 4 replies. 3 were generic comments adding nothing. The 4th was from another user who said they knew the lake and the locals in the surrounding villages had a name for it that was not its official geographical name, but one they used among themselves, meaning something like the lake that watches or the eye of the water, depending on how you interpreted the dialect expression. That user said the shepherds in the area did not bring their livestock to drink from that lake, even though it was the most accessible, and hikers who asked about it always received the same response: to go to another lake an hour's walk north. They never told anyone not to go. They just offered an alternative and hoped the person would accept it without asking further questions. I spent weeks researching before organizing the trip. I looked for the lake on topographic maps and found it marked with its official name. A generic name that said nothing, with no special indication, no marked trail leading to it. Not the slightest sign that it was any different from the hundreds of mountain lakes dotting the inland geography. I searched for more testimonies on other forums and found 3 more mentions, all brief, all written by users with no history, all describing the same thing in different words but with the same essence. Something in the water that watches, something that copies, something that stays when you leave. None of the users had replied to the comments on their threads. None had posted anything again. It was as if they had left their testimony like someone leaving a warning note nailed to a post, and then walked away without looking back. I tried to contact 2 of them by private message, but the accounts were inactive, and the messages went unread in inboxes no one would probably ever open again. The 3rd had deleted their account entirely, and the only thing left of their post was a system message saying, "User deleted," where their name used to be. Like a digital gravestone marking the spot where someone had said something they later decided they did not want to have said. It took me 3 months to organize the trip. I bought a waterproof camera that could record underwater up to 30 meters deep, a powerful flashlight with an 8-hour battery, a tripod to leave the camera recording from the shore, ropes, a reflective vest, and a first aid kit I probably would not need, but that made me feel like I was in control of the situation, like what I was about to do was a well-planned excursion, and not an obsession that had been growing inside my head for 3 months, like a seed someone had planted with that forum thread written in dry, unadorned prose. I mapped out the route, reserved a room at a rural guest house in the village closest to the lake, about 7 kilometers of mountain trail away, and asked for a week off work. I arrived at the village on a Friday afternoon after 4 hours of driving on roads that grew progressively narrower and emptier, leaving civilization behind kilometer by kilometer until the last gas station and the last supermarket were so far away that the car's navigation system stopped showing nearby services and the screen filled with green. The green of the forests and mountains lining the road on both sides like natural walls closing in as I approached the destination. The village was small, one of those that seem frozen in a time not this one, with houses of dark stone and slate roofs and narrow streets smelling of burnt wood and wet grass. And something else I took a moment to identify as the smell of a place where nature is stronger than people, where the forest and the mountain and the water are more present in daily life than cars and screens. The streets were empty at that hour, except for a couple of older men sitting on a stone bench in front of the church, who watched me pass with the restrained curiosity of those who see few outsiders. I greeted them with a nod of the head, a gesture they returned without smiling, without looking away until I turned the corner. The guest house was a renovated stone building with wooden beams on the ceiling and dark tile floors that creaked underfoot with every step, as if the house was registering your presence, your weight, your way of walking. The owner was a woman named Adela, about 65 years old, who received me with the efficient kindness of someone who has been hosting guests for a long time and knows exactly what you need before you ask. Her hands were rough from work and her eyes were clear and attentive, the eyes of someone who has learned to read people by what they ask and what they do not ask. She showed me the room, a simple room with a wooden bed and an old wardrobe and a window facing the valley where you could see the treetops of the forest, stretching toward the mountains like a still green sea. She gave me the keys and asked what my plans were for the week. I told her I wanted to go up to the lake. I did not say which lake. I did not need to. Adela stopped moving her hands, which had been placing a towel on the bed, and went still for a second, long enough for the silence in the room to change texture, as if something invisible had tightened in the air between us. She asked if I meant the lake to the north, the one good for fishing and swimming in summer when the water warmed enough. I said no. I meant the other one, the one on the eastern trail. Adela finished placing the towel without looking at me and said that lake was nothing special, and the path was bad, and it was better to go to the northern one, which had a marked trail and a picnic area. I said I preferred to go to the eastern one. She looked at me with an expression neither hostile nor frightened, but something in between. The expression of someone who has had this conversation before and knows there are two kinds of people, those who accept the suggestion and those who insist. She told me to be careful with the terrain and not to get too close to the water's edge because the shore was slippery and the lake was deep, much deeper than it looked from the outside, and the water temperature would paralyze your muscles in less than a minute if you fell in. She said this looking me in the eyes with a fixedness that did not match practical advice but something more serious, something she was telling me without saying it in words, because the words she needed were words she did not want to use in front of a stranger who probably would not believe her if she used them. I went up to the lake on Saturday morning. I left the village at 8 with my backpack loaded, the camera hanging from my neck, the map on my phone, even though coverage disappeared after the 3rd kilometer. When the forest closed over the trail and the treetops formed a continuous canopy blocking signal and sunlight alike, the path was narrow and climbed through oak and beech forest that grew denser as I gained altitude, with moss-covered trunks glowing an intense green where light managed to filter through the leaves, and roots crossing the trail like veins rising from the skin of something very old beneath the soil. The ground was covered in damp leaves that muffled my footsteps and gave off the smell of decomposing vegetation, part of the forest's atmosphere along with the sound of water running through some unseen stream, and the birdsong that faded as I climbed, as if the altitude stole their desire to sing, or as if they knew that beyond a certain height, the forest belonged to something that preferred silence. After the 5th kilometer, the trail narrowed to little more than a faint trace through the vegetation, something to follow more by intuition than by markers. There were no marks on trees, no stone cairns, no indications. It was a path that did not want to be found, that existed because someone had walked it enough times to leave a trace, but that the vegetation was trying to erase with the slow patience of plants that grow a millimeter a day, and over time, can cover anything humans have left on the earth. After 2 hours of walking, the forest opened suddenly, as if the trees had all decided to stop at the same invisible line none of them wanted to cross, and I saw the lake. It was smaller than I had imagined, about 150 meters across, set in a depression surrounded by trees on 3 sides, and a gray rock wall on the 4th rising vertically above the water, like a wall built by something that wanted to close off the lake on that side. The water surface was still, completely still. No wind, no current, no ripples or waves or any of the movements water makes when something touches it or wind brushes it. It was a smooth, dark surface like a black glass mirror reflecting the trees on the shore and the overcast sky with near-perfect clarity, but with something strange about it that took me a few minutes to identify as I approached the edge. What was strange was that the reflection was not exact. The trees were reflected in the water, but their positions were slightly altered, as if the water's mirror was not reproducing what was above, but a slightly different version, where the trees were a little closer together, or tilted at an angle that did not match reality. A subtle difference you only notice if you look for it. I set up the tripod on the shore about 2 meters from the water, and positioned the camera pointing at the surface. I pressed record and walked to the edge. The shore was dark earth and small stones that sank under my feet with a wet sound indicating the ground was saturated, as if the lake extended beneath the shore beyond where the visible surface ended, as if what I saw was not the whole lake, but only the part showing, with more water and more depth, and more darkness spreading sideways beneath the ground I was standing on. I leaned over the water. I bent slowly, careful not to slip, with the waterproof camera in one hand and the other braced on my knee. The first thing I saw was my reflection, my face leaning down, my hair, my eyes, my hand holding the camera. Everything normal. I moved left. The reflection moved. I raised my hand. The reflection raised its hand. I turned my head. The reflection turned its head. Everything normal for the first 30 seconds, giving me the false confidence to think the forum was full of liars, and the lake was a normal lake, with normal water doing what water does when someone looks into it. Then I saw it. It was not an abrupt change or a dramatic moment. It was subtle and for that reason more disturbing, harder to process, harder to classify as real or imagined. I was looking down, toward the water's surface with my head tilted, and the reflection was looking up, toward me, but at a slightly different angle, as if it was not looking at my eyes but at a point just behind my eyes. A point inside my head I could not see, but the reflection could see from below. I went still. The reflection went still, but not in the same way. I was still because I was observing, analyzing, trying to understand. The reflection was still because it was waiting. There was a difference in the quality of stillness. Felt like the difference between a photograph of a person and a real person staying quiet. Both are still, but one can move, and that potential, that contained capacity for movement, is perceived even if not seen. I raised my right hand slowly. The reflection raised its right hand, but it did so with a half-second delay. Not a half-second of technical lag like one that might be produced by a ripple in the water. A half-second of deliberate delay, as if what was beneath the surface needed that time to see what I did and reproduce it. To copy my gesture after observing it instead of reflecting it simultaneously like a real mirror, which does not think or observe or have intention behind what it shows. What was under the water had intention. It was watching me and copying me, and the half-second was the time it needed to process what it saw and decide how to replicate it, with the precision of something that learns fast but has not yet finished learning. I lowered my hand. The reflection lowered its hand half a second later, with a movement that was almost identical to mine, but had something slightly different in the speed, as if it was calibrating the force and amplitude of the gesture for the next time it had to copy it. I leaned closer to the water to get a better look at the reflection's eyes, and what I saw in those eyes made me lose my balance and fall backward onto the damp shore, my heart pounding against my ribs and my hands sinking into the mud. The reflection's eyes were not mine. They had my shape and my color, but the look inside them was another, a look I did not recognize and that did not belong to me. A look watching me with an attention no reflection should have, because reflections do not watch. They only repeat, and what was under the water was not repeating, but watching with a cold, patient intelligence that had been waiting a long time for someone to lean close enough. The reflection did not fall back with me. It stayed where it was. The face on the water's surface did not move when I pulled away. It was still there, looking up from beneath the surface with my features, but with an expression that was not mine, because mine was fear, and the reflection's was something else. Something like the satisfaction of something that has gotten what it wanted and no longer needs to keep imitating. I crawled backward away from the shore without standing up, without taking my eyes off the water. And as I crawled, I saw something more that made me stop with my hands in the mud and my breath cut short. Behind the face that was imitating me, deeper down, in the darkness of the water that turned black as the depth increased, there were more faces. Dozens of faces, floating at different depths like pale jellyfish suspended in the dark water, each with different features, each looking upward with eyes open, and with that same expression of patient, motionless waiting. Faces that did not resemble each other but shared something, a kinship not physical but of attitude, of the way they floated looking at the surface, as if each was waiting for someone to lean over so it could look at them and copy them, and keep something they needed, something they could only obtain when someone leaned over the water and gave them access to their face and their eyes and what lay behind. And among the faces, deeper still, where light did not reach and the water became pure darkness, there were larger shapes that were not just faces but whole bodies, complete figures floating vertically with arms pressed to their sides and heads facing upward, and eyes open looking toward the surface with the patience of something that has been down there a long time and can keep waiting because the water is cold, and time does not pass the same way beneath the surface as it does above. I grabbed the camera from the tripod without going near the water again. I dismantled the gear with shaking hands and shoved everything into the backpack without worrying about order. I left the lake on the trail running. When the trees closed around me and the light turned green and diffuse and the sound of the water disappeared behind me, replaced by the crunch of leaves and my own rapid breathing sounding too loud in the forest silence, as if the forest was listening to my flight with the same attention with which the lake had listened to my approach. I reached the village at noon. Adela was at the door of the guest house sweeping the entrance. She watched me come down the street with mud-stained clothes and stopped sweeping with that expression that was a mix of resignation and something deeper that could have been compassion or relief. The relief of someone seeing another person return from a place from which people do not always come back the same as they left. She did not ask what happened. She did not ask if I had seen anything or if I was okay or why I had mud on my hands and knees. She told me to go up to my room and rest. She said it with the voice of someone who has said the same words to other people, who have returned from the lake with the same face and the same shaking hands, and the same need to be inside a building with solid walls and no water surfaces where something could reflect and return a look that was not their own. I went up to the room. I took the waterproof camera out of the backpack to check the recording. I found it. I pressed play. The recording showed the lake's surface from the tripod angle. My figure could be seen approaching the edge, leaning down, looking at the water. Everything I had done was clearly recorded, but on the water's surface where my reflection should have appeared, there was nothing. The water was empty, black, smooth, without reflection, without a face, without eyes, without anything looking up from below. The camera had not captured what I had seen, or what I had seen did not exist on the same plane the camera could record, or what was under the water knew the camera was recording and had decided to show itself only to me, only to my eyes, because what it needed was not to be recorded, but to be seen by human eyes that would look back at it and give it access to what lay behind. I went home the next day. I did not finish the week. I paid Adela and left without saying goodbye to anyone else, because there was no one to say goodbye to in a village where people do not talk to outsiders who go to the lake, and outsiders who return do not feel like talking. 3 weeks have passed. I am in my house in my city, far from the lake and the forest and the village and everything connected to that trip that should have been an adventure and turned into something I cannot explain or forget or stop thinking about each night when the lights go out and every reflective surface in my house becomes a window into something that should not be on the other side. Because there is something that does not let me sleep, and each night it is a little worse. Every time I pass a mirror, the bathroom mirror, the hallway mirror, a window pane when the darkness outside turns the glass into a surface that returns images, my reflection does what I do, but it does it with a delay. Half a second, the same half second I saw at the lake, and each day the delay is a little longer. 1 second, 1.5, 2 seconds now. As if what copies me needs more and more time to process my movements because it is stopping copying me, because it has already learned enough and no longer needs to follow my gestures to know how to move, how to walk, how to look, how to be me, or as if what copies me is stopping trying to look like a reflection because it no longer cares whether I know it is not one. I have covered the bathroom and hallway mirrors with old sheets secured with tape around the edges of the frames. I have lowered the blinds on all the windows so the glass does not become a mirror when night falls. I have turned off my computer and phone screens when not in use, because any dark, shiny surface can return a reflection, and any reflection can be a door for what follows me from the lake. But I cannot cover every surface in my house. I cannot eliminate every piece of glass or every mirror or every screen or the water in the sink, or the polished metal of cutlery, or the hundreds of tiny surfaces that reflect images without your noticing, until you look at a spoon and see a face that looks like yours but looks back at you half a second late, and each day needs more time to imitate you because each day it looks more like you and less like a reflection. And last night, when I washed my face in the bathroom with the sheet covering the mirror and dried with the towel, and without thinking, pulled the sheet aside to look at myself as I have done every morning and every night of my life, since I can remember, because looking in the mirror is such an automatic gesture that not even sheets and tape can prevent it. My reflection was already looking at me before I raised my eyes. It was there, in the mirror, with my face and my eyes and my clothes, looking at me with that expression I had seen at the lake, an expression that was not fear or curiosity or surprise. It was the expression of something that has finished learning what it needed and is now only waiting for the moment to use what it has learned. And when our eyes met in the glass, For a second that stretched like something elastic that did not want to break, my reflection did something I did not do. It smiled. I had been sleeping poorly for 3 weeks when I found the forum. It was not a mystery forum or a paranormal phenomena forum, but a health forum where people who had trouble sleeping shared their symptoms and treatments and frustrations, hoping someone had found a solution the doctors did not know, or that the doctors knew but did not prescribe because it was not part of sleep medicine protocols, which consist of pills and telling you not to look at your phone before bed and sending you home hoping the problem will solve itself, because most sleep problems solve themselves if you give them enough time. But mine was not solving itself. I had been getting worse for 3 weeks with the steadiness of something that does not know how to stop or does not want to. I created an account with a fake name and wrote a message describing what was happening to me with the cold objectivity of someone who wants to be taken seriously, not with the desperate tone of someone who has been having the same dream every night for 3 weeks and wakes up each morning more tired than when they went to bed. I described the dream in as much detail as I could remember, which was all the detail because the dream did not fade like normal dreams that vanish in the first minutes of wakefulness, and by breakfast are blurry fragments mixed with real memories. This dream did not fade. It was still there when I woke up, sharp, complete, as present as the room I opened my eyes to each morning. A room, always the same room. A room I did not recognize, and that did not resemble any place I had been awake. White walls with no windows. A gray tile floor with darkened grout lines from something that could be dirt or moisture, or time accumulated in a space that had been closed much longer than any space should be closed. A low ceiling with a single unlit bulb hanging from a black wire in the exact center of the room, with the perfect verticality of something placed there intentionally, not carelessly. A wooden door closed on the far wall, and nothing else. No furniture, no objects, no decoration, nothing indicating what the room was for or who had built it or where it was. An empty room repeating each night with the same exactness, lasting exactly the same amount of time. From the moment I fell asleep to the moment I woke up. 8 hours standing in an empty room looking at the white walls and the closed door, unable to move from the spot where I appeared each night. A specific point about 3 meters from the door and 2 meters from the left wall, always the same point, always the same orientation, always facing the door with the immobility of someone who cannot turn their head or move their feet, or do anything except stand and look and wait for the alarm to sound on the other side of sleep and pull me out of the room until the next night. I received several responses over the following days. People telling me recurring dreams were normal and caused by stress and would go away on their own when the stress went away. People recommending melatonin and relaxation techniques and hot baths before bed and keeping a dream journal and visualizing a safe place before closing your eyes. People telling me about their own recurring dreams, which were nothing like mine, and which were as useful to me as the advice about melatonin, which was not useful at all. I tried melatonin. I fell asleep just as fast and appeared in the room just as fast and spent 8 hours standing looking at the door just like every night. I tried the dream journal. There was nothing to write because the dream was identical every night, and writing the same words each morning did nothing except confirm that nothing changed. And then a response came that made me stop reading the others and sit at my desk chair with my phone in my hands, and the feeling that something that had been pressing on my chest from inside for 3 weeks had just found a crack to escape through. The message was from a user who called himself Corwin. He did not say where he was from or what he did or how old he was. He just described a dream, the same dream. A room with white walls and no windows. A gray tile floor with darkened grout lines. A low ceiling with an unlit bulb hanging from a black wire. A wooden door closed on the far wall. Every detail matched mine. Every measurement, every proportion, every color, every texture. The same room. But Corwin saw it from a different point. Not from where I was, but from the opposite side. From a point 3 meters from the door and 2 meters from the right wall. As if we were both in the same room but in opposite corners, looking at the same door from different angles without being able to see each other. Because in the dream we could not turn our heads or move our eyes from the point in front of us, which was always the door. The closed wooden door we both saw each night for 8 hours without it opening or moving or doing anything except being there, closed, waiting. Corwin said he had been having the dream for 4 weeks, 1 week longer than me. He said he had gone to the doctor and been prescribed pills that did not work. He said he had tried not to sleep, and had lasted 2 nights before his body gave in and sent him back to the room with the brutality of a dream that is not rest, but a collapse, a shutdown of the brain because it cannot stay awake. And when it shuts down, it sends you to the only place it can send you, which is the room with white walls and the closed door. He said the dream was always identical, no variation, no progression, no change indicating the dream was going somewhere or had a purpose or would ever end. He said each night the room was exactly the same, and each night he was in the same spot looking at the same door with the same immobility. I sent him a private message. I described my position in the room and asked him to describe his with the greatest possible precision, including distances to the walls and angle of view relative to the door. His coordinates matched what I would have seen if I had been able to turn my head 180 degrees and look at the opposite corner of the room. We were in the same room, both of us, every night, for weeks, not seeing each other, not knowing the other was there. Like 2 people locked in the same cell who cannot turn to see their cellmate and believe they are alone, until someone on an internet forum describes the same walls and the same floor and the same door with a precision that cannot be coincidence. The following days were a constant exchange of messages in which Corwin and I compared details of the dream with the thoroughness of 2 investigators trying to reconstruct a place they could only see partially. I asked him to describe the door in as much detail as he could. He said it was dark wood, had a metal handle that looked old. The wood had vertical grain, and in the lower right corner there was a mark that looked like a scratch or a burn. I described the door from my angle. Everything matched except the mark, which I saw in the lower left corner, which made sense because we were seeing it from opposite sides and what was his right was my left. Every detail we compared fit with the precision of puzzle pieces cut to go together. The color of the tiles, the height of the ceiling, the distance between the bulb and the door, the thickness of the black wire the bulb hung from. Everything matched. Everything was the same room seen from 2 points symmetrical about the center, as if someone had placed us there deliberately in positions that complemented each other, so that together we could see the whole room without either of us being able to see it whole alone. I searched online for documented cases of shared dreams. I found articles about dream telepathy and experiments from the 70s that had proven nothing, and theories from psychologists about collective archetypes and images the human unconscious shares, because all brains are built with the same basic architecture. None of that explained 2 strangers in different places dreaming of the same room, with the same number of tiles on the floor, and the same mark on the same corner of the same door, and the same bulb hanging from the same wire at the same height. Collective archetypes do not include burn marks on specific corners of specific doors. I asked Corwin if he saw anything else in the room besides the walls and the door and the bulb. He said yes, that he saw something he had not mentioned in his forum post, because he did not know how to describe it without sounding insane, and because part of him hoped that if he did not mention it, perhaps he would stop seeing it, which is the irrational logic of someone who believes things not named lose power and cease to exist. He said that in his field of vision, in the left half of the room, which was the right half of my field of vision, there was something standing. Not a person, not an object, something standing at a point in the room that matched neither my position nor his, but a third point closer to the door than either of us, as if there was a third presence in the room that was neither me nor him, positioned between us and the door like something guarding an entrance or watching an exit, or waiting for something to happen so it could do something it had not yet done. I asked Corwin what he saw looked like. He said he could not see it clearly because it was at the edge of his field of vision, in that peripheral zone where things appear blurry and without detail. A shape that was there but that he could not focus on because his eyes did not move in the dream, just as mine did not move. Fixed on the door, always on the door, as if the room was designed so that those inside could not see anything but the door, and what lay between them and the door they could only perceive with the edge of vision, where shapes lose definition and become blurs that could be anything or nothing. I told him I saw it too, that in my field of vision, in the right half, which was his left half, there was a vertical shape standing between my position and the door that I could not focus on because my eyes were fixed on the door, and the shape was in the periphery where everything blurs. I told him the shape did not move. It was there each night at the same point with the same immobility with which we were in ours. But unlike us, the shape did not seem trapped in its position, but seemed to have chosen to be there, placed between us and the door with the intention of someone who puts themselves in a place deliberately and stays because that place is theirs and has always been theirs, and those who come later are the visitors, and not the other way around. Corwin and I began communicating every day. Each morning we wrote to each other upon waking to describe what we had seen during the night. We agreed on new details to look for, things to notice with peripheral vision, which was all we had to explore the room beyond the door our eyes could not stop looking at. We discovered the room had a crack in the ceiling running from the bulb to the wall with the door, a thin crack only visible if you looked upward with the top edge of your vision, which we could both confirm from our opposite angles. We discovered the floor tiles were not all the same shade of gray, but those closer to the door were 1 degree darker than those at the back, as if something had faded the tiles near the door, or as if something had darkened them with the passage of whatever moved over them each night. Each morning the answer was the same room, the same walls, the same door, the same shape standing between us and the exit. Nothing changed, nothing moved, nothing progressed. It was like looking at the same photograph each night for hours, knowing that on the other side of the room, someone else was looking at the same photograph from another angle, and that between us, there was something we could both perceive, but neither could see clearly. Corwin told me one morning that he had begun to feel something in the dream he had not felt the first weeks. A pressure. Not a physical pressure, but a pressure like a tension. The sensation that something in the room was watching him with a concentration he could feel at the back of his neck, like the heat of a flame behind you that you cannot see but know is there, because your skin detects it before your eyes do. I told him I felt the same, that the shape between us and the door generated a pressure that was not physical but perceptual, the pressure of something observing you with an intensity exceeding human eyes, felt as a weight on the body and a tightness in the chest, and an irrational certainty that what watches you knows more about you than you know yourself. In the 5th week, something changed. I fell asleep like every night and appeared in the room like every night at my usual spot, looking at the door with fixed eyes and motionless body. But the room was not exactly the same. It took me a few minutes to identify what had changed, because the changes were small and subtle, and my eyes could not move to examine the room. So I had to rely on the periphery of my vision to detect the differences. The first difference was the bulb. It was on, a weak yellowish light hanging from the black wire, illuminating the room with a clarity it had not had in the previous 5 weeks, changing the shadows and proportions and the way the white walls reflected the light, making the room feel smaller than it had felt in the dark, as if the darkness had been hiding the true boundaries of the room and the light had revealed them, and the boundaries were closer than I had thought. The second difference was the shape. The shape standing between my position and the door was still there, but was no longer a blurry patch in the periphery of my vision. With the bulb lit, I could see more details. Not many, because it was still in the peripheral zone where vision loses definition, but enough to know the shape had the height of a person and the width of a person, and something at the top resembling a head that was not facing the door like mine, but was turned toward me. The shape was looking at me, not looking at the door as I was looking at it, and as Corwin was looking at it from the other side. Looking at me, with something I could not see clearly but felt as an attention pressing on my body with the weight of something watching with more intensity than human eyes can produce. The third difference I noticed just before waking, in that moment of the dream when the alarm is about to sound, and the room begins to fade at the edges like an image losing focus from the outside in. The door. The door was still closed, but the metal handle had changed position. It was 1 degree lower than the previous night, a degree no one would have noticed if they had not spent 5 weeks looking at that door 8 hours a night, memorizing every grain of wood, and every curve of metal, and every shadow the non-existent light cast on its surface. The handle had moved, not the door, the handle, as if someone on the other side was testing whether the door would open, pushing the handle down with pressure so light the movement was almost imperceptible, but was there. A difference of 1 degree meaning something on the other side of the door was trying to enter, or something on this side was preparing the door to open when the time came. I woke at 4 in the morning with my heart pounding in my throat. I grabbed my phone and wrote to Corwin. I told him about the bulb and the shape turned toward me and the handle. I waited for his reply. I waited 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. At 7 in the morning, Corwin had not replied. At 8, neither. Not at 9 or 10 or 11 or the rest of the day. I wrote him 6 more messages throughout the day, each longer than the last, each with more questions and more details about what I had seen that night, hoping some detail would be enough to make him reply. None were read. His account was still active, but his last connection was from the previous night, at 11:43, 3 minutes before the time he usually fell asleep according to what he had told me in one of our conversations. 3 minutes before entering the room where the bulb had turned on and the shape had turned its head. Corwin did not reply the next day, nor the next, nor the next. I searched for his username on other forums. It did not exist anywhere else. I searched for variations of the name, versions with numbers, misspellings. Nothing. Corwin existed only on the sleep forum, and in the room we both shared each night. And now he existed only in the room, because on the forum his account showed the same last connection. It would show forever. 11:43 on the night everything changed. 10 days have passed since his last message. I still have the dream every night. The room is still there. The white walls, the gray floor, the bulb lit, the door closed. And the shape still stands between my position and the door, turned toward me, looking at me with something that is not eyes but works like eyes. And each night it seems a little closer to my position, a few centimeters closer, as if it moves through the room between one dream and the next with a slowness only perceptible. If you compare its position one night to the next, and notice the distance between it and my fixed point has shrunk the same imperceptible, constant way the distance shrinks between something approaching and something that cannot move. But what keeps me from sleeping is not the shape approaching. It is something I saw the night after Corwin stopped responding. Something in the opposite corner of the room at the point where Corwin had told me he appeared each night, at his fixed position from which he looked at the same door I looked at. In that corner there was no longer emptiness. There was something. Something that was not the shape between us and the door, but something different. Something at the exact point where Corwin said he appeared each night, with the height of a person and the width of a person, and something at the top resembling a head but not moving, not looking at the door, but facing forward with the fixity of something that can no longer move, because it no longer needs to move, because it is already where it needs to be. And what was in Corwin's corner was not the blurry shape of my peripheral vision, but something I could see clearly enough to recognize that it had features, and the features resembled those of a person, and the person they resembled was someone who had been standing in that corner each night for 5 weeks, looking at the same door I was looking at, until one night the bulb turned on, and the shape turned its head, and Corwin stopped being in his corner as a person, and started being as something else that resembled a person but was no longer one. What remained of Corwin in the opposite corner had his height, and his width, and something like his silhouette, but was empty inside in the way husks are empty, when what was inside has left or been taken out or been consumed by something that needed. What was inside and left the outer form as a shell serving no purpose except to mark the spot where someone once was before ceasing to be. And each night the shape between my position and the door moves a little closer. And each night what remains of Corwin in the opposite corner looks a little less like a person, and a little more like what the shape is. A vertical, motionless thing watching a door that does not open, absorbing those inside the room one by one with the patience of something that has all the nights in the world. And each night the door handle is 1 degree lower, and I am next, and I cannot stop sleeping. And each night the shape is closer, and each night the door remains closed but less closed than the night before. And I'm beginning to understand that the door is not closed to keep something from entering the room, but to keep something from leaving. And that what the shape is doing is not approaching me, but pushing me toward the door, centimeter by centimeter, night by night, until my back touches the wood and the door opens to the other side. And what is on the other side receives me with whatever received Corwin, and whoever was before Corwin, in a room that has been waiting for visitors long before any of us started dreaming of it. I chose the secondary road because the GPS told me there was an accident on the highway, and the traffic jam was an hour long, And because an hour of traffic at 11 at night when I had been driving since 6 in the evening, and all I wanted was to get home and crawl into bed, was an hour I was not willing to spend sitting in a stationary car behind a line of trucks with brake lights tinting the night red. The GPS offered me an alternate route, a secondary road that left the highway at kilometer 210 and skirted a mountainous area for 80 kilometers before rejoining the highway 100 kilometers further on. Past the accident, 80 kilometers of secondary road at night through an area I did not know, but 80 kilometers were less than an hour of traffic, and at 11 at night, anything that lets you keep moving is better than staying still. I took the exit. The secondary road started like all secondary roads that leave highways do, with a stretch of fresh asphalt still showing the fresh marks of the last coat of paint, deteriorating as you move away from the highway, because secondary roads receive less maintenance than highways, and the money spent on asphalt goes to the roads more people use, while the roads fewer people use are left with old asphalt, faded lines, and potholes no one repairs because no one complains because no one travels them. 5 kilometers from the exit, the road narrowed. 2 lanes became 1.5, the width of mountain secondary roads where 2 cars can pass but carefully, and where a car and a truck cannot pass without one of them pulling onto the shoulder to let the other by. The streetlights disappeared. The guardrails disappeared. What remained was a ribbon of asphalt climbing the mountainside with tight curves, the headlights illuminated one by one, as if the road was revealing itself as I advanced, as if what lay beyond the next curve did not exist until my headlights lit it up. At 10 kilometers, I found the first thing. It was on the right shoulder. A suitcase. A travel suitcase with wheels and a telescopic handle. The kind people use for air or train travel. Not the kind of object you find on the shoulder of a secondary mountain road at 11:20 at night. The suitcase was open. The lid was raised, revealing an interior that was empty except for a couple of rolled socks in one corner, and a clear toiletry bag containing a toothbrush, a tube of toothpaste, a deodorant, the things you carry in your toiletry bag when you travel, the bag you keep inside the suitcase because the toiletry bag goes inside the suitcase and the suitcase goes with you. Not on the shoulder of a mountain road, open and empty, as if someone had opened it to take out what was inside and left the suitcase there because they no longer needed it, or because they could no longer carry it. I drove on. I did not stop. I did not stop because stopping on a mountain road at 11 at night to look at an abandoned suitcase is the kind of thing people do not do, because abandoned suitcases on roads at night are not things you want to investigate up close when you are alone and the road is dark, and the only thing illuminating the night is your headlights, and what your headlights illuminate is all that exists. I drove on and kept driving and thought the suitcase belonged to someone who had lost it or thrown it away or dropped it from their car, and it would stay there until someone picked it up or the wind carried it off the road or time undid it. At 20 kilometers, I found the second thing, a pair of shoes, men's shoes, in the middle of the road. Not on the shoulder, but in the middle of the lane I was driving in. I saw them with just enough warning to swerve half a second before running over them. They were dress shoes, dark shoes with laces, placed side by side with the symmetry of someone who has taken off their shoes and set them down carefully instead of throwing them or dropping them without looking. Someone had stopped in the middle of the road and taken off their shoes and placed them side by side, as if they were leaving shoes at the entrance of a house, and not on the asphalt of a mountain road where cars pass at 80 kilometers per hour and where shoes in the middle of the lane are an obstacle that can cause an accident. The suitcase at 10 kilometers, the shoes at 20. 2 objects from the same person, or from 2 different people who had left things on the road for reasons I could not explain, forming a sequence that could be coincidence or could be something more than coincidence. I kept driving with the attention of someone expecting to find something else on the road, not knowing what would come next, but knowing there would be something next because sequences that start with a suitcase and continue with shoes do not end with shoes. At 30 kilometers, I found a phone, on the left shoulder. A phone with a cracked screen, shining with the light of the headlights as I passed it. The screen had a crack running from corner to corner, making the light refract along the edges of the crack with a gleam that was the only gleam on a road that had no other gleam except my headlights. I did not stop. I kept driving, but I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the phone on the shoulder, shining smaller and smaller until the darkness swallowed it and it stopped shining. At 40 kilometers, I found a jacket. On the right shoulder, a dark suit jacket spread out on the ground as if someone had taken it off and dropped it without folding it, without hanging it, without the care people have for clothes when the clothes matter to them. The jacket was spread with its arms open like a body without a body, something someone had left on the road, having the shape of a man lying on his back, but not a man. An empty jacket lying there because the man who had worn it had taken it off and left it and kept walking without it for a reason. I could not imagine, because people do not take off their jacket on a mountain road at 11 at night and leave it on the ground as if they no longer needed it. Suitcase, shoes, phone, jacket. 4 things in 40 kilometers. 1 thing every 10 kilometers. A progression from large to personal. From a suitcase, the first thing you drop when fleeing something, to shoes. The next thing, to a phone. What connects you to the world? To a jacket. What protects you from the cold? Each thing more intimate than the last. Each thing more necessary than the last. As if someone was walking down the road ahead of me, leaving things behind in the order you drop things when something is chasing you. And what chases you is getting closer, and you need to shed weight to run faster. At 50 kilometers, I found a shirt, white, wrinkled, buttons undone as if someone had ripped it off their body with the haste of someone needing to remove something they were wearing, because what they were wearing marked them, and what chased them followed the marks. And the marks were the things you carry, the things that identify you, that say who you are. And if you shed them, you stop being who you were for a second, and that second is a second you gain, before what chases you finds you again. In the middle of the road like the shoes, placed with the same symmetry as the shoes, spread on the asphalt with arms open and collar stretched, and the shape of a torso with no person inside. The shirt was stained, not with mud or grease or any substance I could identify at the speed I passed it. Stained with something dark that under the headlights looked black, but could have been dark red or dark brown or any color organic things have. When they are outside the body, they should be inside. And I did not want to think what it was, because shirts stained with something dark abandoned on a mountain road at midnight suggest things you do not want to think about when you are alone, driving a road that grows narrower and darker and more full of things someone has left behind with each kilometer. And the things were growing warmer. The suitcase at 10 kilometers was cold. The shoes at 20 were on the asphalt, and the asphalt was cold. But the phone at 30 had its screen lit with the faint light phone screens have when someone has just used them, and the screen has not yet gone completely dark. The jacket at 40 was not wet with the night dew that covers things that have been outdoors for hours, but dry, as if it had been on the ground only a short time. And the shirt at 50 was warm, not hot, but warm with the warmth clothes have when someone takes them off and leaves them somewhere, and the clothes still hold the heat of the body that wore them, which meant the things had not been on the road for hours. They had been there for minutes, which meant whoever had left them had not left them long ago but recently, which meant whoever was leaving things on the road ahead of me was ahead of me now. On this road, on this night, at a distance shrinking with each kilometer, I covered at 80 kilometers per hour, and they covered at the speed of a person walking who had run out of suitcase and shoes and phone and jacket and shirt on a mountain road at midnight. I slowed down. I did not want to catch up to whatever was ahead of me. I did not want to see the person leaving their things on the road kilometer by kilometer, like a trail someone leaves for another to follow, or like belongings someone sheds when something takes them from them one by one. I slowed to 60, to 40. The headlights illuminated less road at lower speed, and the field of vision shrank and the darkness drew closer. And what lay beyond the headlights was closer than it had been when I drove at 80. At 60 kilometers, I found a belt, on the shoulder. A leather belt coiled like a sleeping snake, its buckle open and the leather still curved with the shape of a waist that had just unbuckled it. The belt was warm. I knew without touching it because warm leather has a different sheen than cold leather, and because the curve of the belt had not yet relaxed, meaning less than a minute had passed since the belt had been around a waist, and that waist was less than a kilometer from where I was. I stopped the car. I stopped in the middle of the road because there was no shoulder wide enough to pull over, and stopping in the middle of the road on a road no one else was using was not a problem, because no one was going to hit my stationary car, because no one was on this road except me and whatever was ahead of me leaving things on the asphalt. I turned off the headlights. I sat in the car in the dark with my hands on the steering wheel and the engine idling, vibrating with the low vibration of an engine that is on but not moving. I listened. The silence of the mountain has sounds the silence of the city does not have. Wind in the trees, sounding like slow, deep breathing coming from everywhere and nowhere. Nocturnal animals moving through the undergrowth with the dry rustle of leaves being stepped on and branches being pushed aside. The creak of branches when something larger than an animal moves them with the weight of something that has a body, that weighs, that moves among the trees without concern for the noise it makes. But besides those sounds, I heard another, a sound that was not wind or animal or branch. It was the sound of bare feet on asphalt, the soft rhythmic sound of someone walking barefoot down a road, the soles of their feet striking the asphalt with each step, producing a sound different from the sound of shoes on asphalt because bare feet are softer and quieter but not entirely silent, and on a mountain road at midnight where there is no other human sound. The sound of bare feet walking can be heard with the clarity of something that does not want to hide or cannot hide, or no longer cares about hiding, because what matters is not being heard, but keeping on walking. The rhythm was the rhythm of someone not running but not walking slowly either. Walking with the urgency of someone who needs to keep moving, because what is behind them has not stopped, and what is behind them is getting closer. The sound came from ahead, from the road ahead of my car, from the darkness beyond where my headlights turned off could reach. The sound of bare feet was moving slowly away, as if the person walking did not know I was there, or as if they knew I was there but did not care, because what mattered to them was not me, but what was behind them, forcing them to keep walking and to keep leaving things on the road because each thing they left was one less thing to carry, one less thing connecting them to what they were before they started walking down this road. I turned on the headlights. The light illuminated the road ahead, 50 meters of empty asphalt, 100 meters of empty asphalt. No one was there. The bare feet had stopped sounding. The person walking ahead of me had vanished or stepped off the road or was farther than the headlights could reach. But on the asphalt ahead of my car, about 30 meters away, there was something else. Another thing. The next thing in the sequence. I started the car. I advanced slowly to the object. It was trousers. Dark suit trousers matching the jacket from 40 kilometers. They were in the middle of the road, spread out like the jacket and like the shirt, with legs open and waist stretched, the shape of legs with no person inside. The trousers were hot. Not warm. Hot. With the heat clothes have when someone has just taken them off seconds ago, not minutes. Whoever had worn the trousers had taken them off less than 30 seconds ago. Less than 30 seconds, which at the speed I was driving was less than 200 meters away. I looked ahead. The road curved to the right about 100 meters on. A sharp mountain curve, the headlights partially illuminated, showing the rusted guardrail marking the edge of the curve, protecting cars from falling into the ravine on the other side. I advanced to the curve. I took the curve slowly, and on the other side of the curve, the headlights illuminated something that made me hit the brake and sit with my hands gripping the steering wheel, and my eyes wide. In the middle of the road, 20 meters from my car, there was someone, a figure standing in the center of the lane facing my car. The figure was motionless, arms at its sides, head tilted slightly forward like the head of someone exhausted, without the strength to hold it upright, letting gravity pull it down. They wore no clothes. They wore no shoes. They wore nothing. They stood in the middle of a mountain road at midnight with nothing on except skin, and the darkness surrounding them like a coat made of night. My headlights illuminated them from the front, and the light gave their skin a white color that was not the white of human skin, but the white of things that have not seen the sun in a long time, that have lost the color skin has when it is alive, replaced by the color things have when something has taken from them what made them have color. It was a man, or had been a man. He had the build of a man and the height of a man and the shape of a man, but what he lacked was what makes a man, and not a shape with the silhouette of a man. The figure did not move. It stood looking toward my headlights with eyes that did not blink, and a mouth that was closed, and an expression that was not fear or surprise or relief, or any of the expressions a person would have standing naked in the middle of a mountain road at midnight seeing the headlights of an approaching car. The expression was empty, Empty like the suitcase, empty like the shoes, empty like the phone and the jacket and the shirt and the belt and the trousers, empty of everything that made that person a person, now scattered along the road kilometer by kilometer like a trail of things someone had been leaving, until nothing was left to leave except the body. And the body was there standing on the road waiting for me to arrive, waiting for someone to travel the road and find the things and follow the things and reach the end of the sequence, which was a person with nothing standing on the road, looking toward the headlights of the car that had followed the trail. And as I watched the figure standing on the road, I saw that behind it the darkness was moving. Not the wind, not the branches. The darkness itself was moving, as if the darkness were something solid with shape, shifting behind the figure with the slowness of something that had been pursuing someone for kilometers, taking their things from them one by one. And now that no things remained to take, it was approaching the body, the last thing left. I put the car in reverse. I pressed the accelerator. The car reversed down the road at the speed a car can reach in reverse, which is not fast but fast enough to move away from something you do not want to see, do not want to understand, do not want to catch you. The engine protested with the high whine of low gears at high revolutions, and the car vibrated with the vibration of something being forced to do something it was not designed for, because cars are designed to go forward, not backward. And reversing on a mountain road at night is a madness you only do when what lies ahead is worse than what might happen if you reverse blind. I reversed around the curve. I reversed down the straight stretch. I ran over the trousers, feeling them under the wheels like a soft lump the car crushed without stopping. I ran over the belt, over the shirt. I reversed kilometers down a mountain road at night, looking in the rearview mirror with the desperation of someone wanting to reach the point where they took the detour and return to the highway and leave this road behind forever. But as I reversed, I saw something in the rearview mirror that made me hit the brake. On the road behind me, illuminated by the red taillights of my car, there was something on the asphalt, something that had not been there when I passed the first time. It was a suitcase, a different suitcase from the first. A sports bag, smaller and softer, with an open zipper. A bag that looked like my gym bag, which had been in my trunk. I turned to look at the trunk. The trunk was open. The gym bag I had carried in the trunk was not there. The road was taking things from me. What had happened to the one ahead was happening to me. The road did not distinguish between the one ahead and the one behind. The road took things from everyone who traveled it. And I was traveling it. Forward or backward did not matter. What mattered was that I was on the road, and the road was taking things from me kilometer by kilometer. And each kilometer I traveled, something of mine would appear on the asphalt as the things of the one ahead had appeared. I looked at the passenger seat. My jacket was not there. The jacket I had left on the passenger seat when I left home 6 hours ago was not there. I looked at the glove compartment. It was empty. The car documents and the manual and the sunglasses I kept there had disappeared. I accelerated in reverse, faster, more kilometers. And each kilometer something of mine appeared on the road. My jacket spread on the asphalt with arms open like the other jacket. My sunglasses on the shoulder. The car documents scattered on the road like leaves the wind had torn from a tree. The road was stripping me with every meter I traveled, and it did not matter if I went forward or backward, because the road had no direction but had hunger. And what has hunger eats in all directions. And in the rearview mirror behind my things I saw something else. The darkness was moving. The same darkness that had moved behind the naked figure at the curve. The darkness advanced down the road behind me with the same slowness with which it had advanced behind the other. And the distance between the darkness and my car was shrinking, because the darkness does not tire, and cars in reverse do not go fast. And because what travels this road does not pursue one person, but pursues all the people who travel it. One after another in a chain of bodies leaving their things on the asphalt kilometer by kilometer until nothing is left to leave. And they stand in the dark with nothing on, waiting for the next car to take the detour that does not exist, and travel the road someone traveled before, and find the things and follow the things, and reach the end where the darkness waits with the patience of something that has all night and all the nights in the world. My grandfather died in the country house where he had lived alone for the last 40 years. The mailman found him. He came once a week to deliver mail to the box at the entrance, and that week he noticed the box was still full from his previous visit. He knocked on the door. No one answered. He called the civil guard, and when they entered, they found him sitting in the kitchen chair with his head resting on the table and a half-drunk glass of water next to his right hand. He was 87 years old, and according to the doctor who certified the death, he had not suffered. His heart had simply stopped while he drank a glass of water in the afternoon, and he had fallen asleep on the table without knowing he would not wake up. He left the house to me because I am the only grandchild left. My parents did not want it because it is in a village of 30 inhabitants 2 hours from the nearest city, and maintaining a country house you only use 2 weeks a year costs more money than you save by not paying for a hotel during those 2 weeks. My 2 siblings renounced their share of the inheritance because neither has a car or the time or the desire to drive 2 hours on mountain roads to reach a stone house without central heating, where the most modern thing is a tube television still. Working with rabbit ear antennas. I'm 36 years old and work as a maintenance technician for an industrial climate control company. My job consists of repairing and installing air conditioning and heating systems in large buildings, which means I spend my days in basements, machine rooms, ventilation ducts, and all those spaces in buildings no one sees, but that make the temperature habitable for the people working on the floors above. I am used to enclosed spaces, to darkness, to the smell of dampness and cement dust and motor grease that fills the interior of buildings when you go down far enough to reach where the building's guts are. Basements do not scare me. Tight spaces do not make me claustrophobic. Darkness does not bother me. These are normal conditions of my work, and I accept them with the same naturalness with which a fisherman accepts cold water and the smell of salt. I went to my grandfather's house 3 weeks after the funeral to take inventory of what was inside and decide what to do with it. It was a 2-story house with a stone facade and a slate roof, on the outskirts of the village at the end of a dirt road that left the main highway and climbed the slope of a hill covered with oaks and chestnut trees that in autumn left a carpet of brown leaves on the ground, crunching under the car's wheels like small bones. The village was called Hontasilla, or at least that is what my grandfather called it, though I never saw it on any official map, and the few remaining villagers pronounced it in different ways, as if the name had been deformed over the years and accents until it became something each said in their own way. It was one of those inland villages that have been dying for decades, with more empty houses than inhabited ones, and more people in the cemetery than on the streets. I remember the summers I spent there as a child as weeks of silence interrupted by the crowing of roosters and the sound of wind in the oaks, and my grandfather, as voice telling me stories about the countryside while we ate dinner in the kitchen with the door open to the garden and the smell of the vegetable garden coming in with the evening breeze. The house had a front garden with a low stone wall, a vegetable garden in the back that my grandfather had cultivated until the last year of his life, and a wooden shed where he kept his tools and firewood for the fireplace. I entered with the keys the notary had given me. The inside of the house was as my grandfather had left it, with that stillness spaces have when someone has lived in them for a long time and suddenly they are empty, as if the objects were waiting for their owner to return, and did not know what to do with themselves in the meantime. The kitchen still smelled of coffee and fireplace smoke. The living room had the fireplace cold with the ashes from the last time my grandfather lit it. The bedroom had the bed made with the crocheted bedspread my grandmother had woven before she died, and that my grandfather had never changed. My grandmother had died when I was 4 years old, and I barely remembered her. What I knew of her, I knew from the photos in the living room and from the few times my grandfather spoke of her, always in the past tense, always with short sentences that closed the subject before I could ask questions. Her name was Edviges, and she had been born in the village and had died in the village. And between those 2 dates there had been a life about which my grandfather told nothing, except that she was a good woman and made the best chestnut soup in the region. My mother, her daughter-in-law, once told me that grandmother Edviges had stopped leaving the house in the last years of her life, and when she went to visit her, she always found her sitting in the kitchen with the basement door behind her, and an expression on her face that my mother described as that of someone standing guard. I asked her what she was guarding against. My mother said she did not know and preferred not to know. The basement was what interested me. My grandfather never let us go down to the basement. As a child, when I spent summers at the house, the basement was the only forbidden place. My grandfather kept the door locked with a padlock, and the key was always on him in his pants pocket, with the car keys and the house key. When I asked what was down there, he would tell me tools, farm supplies, old things a child would not be interested in. He said it in a tone that did not allow further questions, a tone I recognized even as a child as the tone of someone who did not want to lie, but did not want to tell the truth either. Once, when I was 9 years old, I went down to the basement without permission. My grandfather was in the vegetable garden and had left the basement door without the padlock, just the latch, which I could move if I stood on my toes and pulled with both hands. I went down the first 3 steps before the smell stopped me. Not the smell of dampness or cold stone I expected from a country house basement. Another smell. A smell I could not identify at 9 years old, but that my body recognized before my mind did. Because it made me gag, and I climbed back up the 3 steps to the kitchen at a speed I did not know my child's legs could reach. When my grandfather came back from the vegetable garden, he found me sitting at the kitchen table with a white face and the basement door closed. He looked at me. He looked at the door. He said nothing. That night he added a second padlock. I never tried to go down to the basement again. But from that night on, I began to hear things. Sounds coming from under the kitchen when I lay down in the upstairs bedroom. Sounds my grandfather told me were rats. That country houses have rats, and rats make noise at night when they come out to look for food. I believed him because I was 9, and because my grandfather was the person I trusted most in the world, and because rats were an explanation my child's brain could accept without losing sleep. But the sounds I heard at night from under the kitchen were not rat sounds. They were heavier, slower, more regular, like footsteps. But not human footsteps, the footsteps of something that had more feet than anything that walks should have. The basement door was in the kitchen, under the stairs leading to the second floor. It was a solid wood door with a steel padlock that my grandfather had reinforced with an iron bar running from one wall to the other, turning the door into something more like the entrance to a vault than a country house basement door. I found the padlock key on the key ring the notary gave me with the other keys. I opened the padlock, removed the bar, and pushed the door open. The stairs went straight down about 3 meters to a packed earth floor that smelled of dampness and cold stone, and something else I took a few seconds to identify as the smell of the earth. It's interior when you dig deep enough to reach where the surface air does not reach. I turned on my phone's flashlight and went down the steps carefully, because the wood was damp and slippery with the mold covering its surface like a layer of green velvet. The basement was larger than I expected. It was not the tool shed my grandfather had described, but a rectangular room about 6 meters by 4, with a low ceiling of wooden beams and walls of unlined stone. There were wooden shelves against the left wall with glass jars containing preserves my grandfather had made from his vegetable garden vegetables. Jars that had not been opened in years. There were tools hanging from nails on the far wall. Hose, shovels, an axe, a handsaw, coiled ropes, chains of various thicknesses. And against the right wall, covering the entire wall surface from floor to ceiling, there was a cabinet. An enormous cabinet, solid wood without doors, that seemed built there because it was too large to have come through the basement door. The cabinet was full of cardboard boxes stacked on top of each other in no apparent order. I approached the cabinet to see what was in the boxes. The first I opened contained old clothes, the second rusty hand tools, the third farm accounting books with dates going back to the 1960s. Nothing interesting. Nothing that justified the padlock and the iron bar and 40 years of prohibition. But then I noticed something. The cabinet was not flush against the wall. It was separated by about 5 centimeters, enough for a current of cold air to flow behind it, reaching my ankles when I got close. A current of air coming from the wall, from behind the cabinet. From some point in the stone wall the cabinet was covering. I tried to move the cabinet. It was heavy, much heavier than a wooden cabinet should be, even full of boxes. I pushed it with my shoulder and it barely moved 2 centimeters. I emptied the boxes one by one, taking them out of the cabinet and leaving them on the basement floor until the cabinet was empty. I pushed it again. It moved a little more. It took me 15 minutes to shift it half a meter to the left, enough to see what it was covering. The crack. A crack in the stone wall running from floor to ceiling, about 30 centimeters wide at its widest point. It was not a natural crack, the kind that forms from soil settling or tree roots pushing against the foundation. It was a clean crack, with straight edges, as if someone had removed stones from the wall to create an opening and then changed their mind and tried to close it without quite succeeding. The missing stones were not on the floor or anywhere else in the basement. They had been taken away. And what lay behind the stone wall was not earth or rock or the structure of the hill against which the house was built. It was a space dug out of the earth extending beyond the basement wall into the hill. The flashlight illuminated the first meters of a narrow passage with walls of compacted earth and a ceiling so low you would have to walk bent over to advance. The floor was damp earth with marks that were not from animals. They were parallel grooves like the tracks left by a wheelbarrow's wheels or the heels of someone being dragged along the ground. I hesitated. Part of me, the part that works in basements and tight spaces and is not afraid of darkness, wanted to go in to see how far the passage went and what was at the end. Another part, the part that had grown up spending summers in that house and remembered the padlock and the iron bar and my grandfather's face when I asked what was in the basement, that part told me the cabinet was there for a reason. And the reason was not to protect what was behind the cabinet, but to protect what was in front of it from what was behind. I went in. I bent down and advanced through the passage with the flashlight in one hand, and the other hand braced against the earth wall to keep my balance on a floor that was damp and slippery, sloping gently downward into the hill. The passage was about 15 meters long and ended in a chamber, not a natural cave, but a space dug by hand. The walls smoothed with tools, the ceiling reinforced with wooden planks someone had nailed against the earth to keep it from collapsing. The earth walls were damp to the touch, and the hand I braced against them came away stained with a cold mud that had a reddish color, not the color of the local soil, which was dark brown. It was a color more like rust or the color blood leaves when it dries on a porous surface and mixes with the material over enough time to change the color of the earth itself, as if what had passed through this passage over 40 years had left a chemical trace in the walls that no rain or passing years could wash away, because it was absorbed into the very structure of the earth. The chamber was the size of a small bedroom, about 3 meters by 3. In the center there was a wooden table with a chair. On the table were objects the flashlight illuminated one by one as I swept the beam across the room with the slowness of someone who knows what they are about to see will not please them, but needs to see it to understand what their grandfather had done for 40 years under a country house in a village of 30 inhabitants where people disappeared. Because people did disappear. I had known that since childhood. My grandfather mentioned it sometimes during summer dinners, the way one comments on the weather or the harvest, with the naturalness of someone talking about something that happens and has no explanation but does not need one, because things happen, and that is that. He would say, so-and-so had not come back from the fair. So-and-so had not opened her shop again. Someone from the next village over had not been seen at church on Sunday and no one knew where they were. He said it looking at his bowl of soup with an expression I interpreted as concern as a child, and that now, standing in a room dug under his house looking at what was on the table, I interpreted as something very different. On the table there were documents, old identification cards with black and white photos and names typed on a typewriter. There were seven identification cards of 7 different people I did not know, but whose names my grandfather had mentioned at some point during summer dinners as people who had disappeared from the village or the surrounding villages over the years. Beside the documents there were personal objects, a wristwatch, a ring, a chain with a pendant, a pair of glasses, a handkerchief with embroidered initials, objects belonging to people who were not in that room but whose documents were on that table, kept with the care of someone filing closed cases. I counted the documents again. 7 people. I opened each document one by one and looked at the birth dates and the photos. The photos showed faces I did not recognize because I had never seen them in person. They were ordinary country people's faces, with the serious expression everyone puts on for official document photos. Men and women of various ages, the youngest in their 20s and the oldest in their 60s, who had lived in the area at some point in the last 4 decades, and had stopped living at some point. No one had precisely recorded, because in small villages, people disappear without anyone calling the police until weeks or months have passed. And by then, the trail has gone cold, and the cases are filed as voluntary disappearances of people who left the countryside for the city like everyone who can. And at the back of the chamber on the opposite wall from the entrance, there was another crack, narrower than the first. just wide enough for a person to pass sideways, and from that crack came the cold air and the smell of damp earth, and something more I could now identify with the clarity of someone who has gone down far enough that they can no longer pretend they do not know what it is. It was a sweet, heavy smell that stuck in the throat and made the stomach clench with an involuntary movement that was not disgust, but recognition. The kind of recognition the body makes before the mind does when it detects something evolution has taught it to avoid for thousands of years. I did not go through the second crack. I stood in the chamber looking at the narrow opening in the back wall, like a vertical mouth breathing cold, damp, sweet air. I did not go through because what I saw on the floor in front of the crack stopped me more effectively than a concrete wall. There were tracks in the damp earth. Two kinds of tracks. One set went from the chamber toward the crack, inward, toward whatever lay beyond that second opening. They were tracks from work boots, the kind my grandfather wore to work in the vegetable garden, with thick soles and the zigzag pattern rubber boots leave when they step in mud. Those tracks went inward, always inward, never outward. My grandfather went in through that crack, but what came back did not leave boot tracks. What came back left the other kind of tracks. Grooves in the earth, drag marks, the same parallel grooves I had seen on the passage floor, as if what my grandfather took through the crack he took by dragging, and what he brought out another way. Which meant my grandfather went through that crack walking, and what he carried with him did not walk. He dragged it, dragged something or someone through a 15-meter passage of damp earth, and then through a crack just wide enough for a body to pass sideways. And whatever was on the other side of that crack received it. Whatever left tracks of fingers that were not human was waiting on the other side with the patience of something that does not have to go out looking for its food because someone brings it to its door. But the boot tracks were not what stopped me. What stopped me was the second kind of tracks. Tracks that were not from boots or bare feet or anything a human being could have made. They were tracks from something that had toes, many more toes than a human foot has, and had come out of the second crack and walked through the chamber and gone back in. The tracks went from the crack to the table where the documents were, and from the table back to the crack again, as if whatever had come out from in there had come to the table to check something, to review the documents, to count the personal objects, to make sure the inventory was complete, and then had gone back through the crack with the satisfaction of one who has verified the work is done, and the numbers add up. I looked at the tracks with the flashlight trembling in my hand. They were larger than a human foot, about 30 centimeters long and disproportionately wide, suggesting something squat and heavy that moved by putting its full weight on limbs with 8 or 10 toes each. Toes leaving individual marks in the damp earth with the sharpness of something that steps hard and does not try to hide its trail because it does not need to hide from anything. What left those tracks was the owner of the cave. My grandfather was the visitor, the supplier, the one who went up the basement stairs after each delivery and closed the door with padlock and iron bar, not because he was afraid of what was below, but because he had an agreement with what was below. And part of the agreement was that the door was closed after each visit, and that what lived on the other side of the second crack did not come up as long as my grandfather kept his part. My grandfather did not act alone. What was on the other side of the second crack was what received what my grandfather brought. And what my grandfather brought were people who disappeared from small villages where no one asked too many questions, because people leave the countryside for the city and villages empty out. And when someone disappears from a place where 30 people live, the simplest explanation is that they went to look for a better life. And the simplest explanation is always the one people choose to believe. I leaned against the earth wall of the chamber trying to breathe normally. The air was thick and sweet, and each breath filled my lungs with something my body wanted to expel but could not. Because to expel the air I had to inhale first, and each inhalation brought more of that smell that was the olfactory signature of what my grandfather had done for 40 years in a basement he let no one down into. A basement he kept locked with padlock and iron bar the way you lock a door that guards something that must not get out. I went up the basement stairs. I closed the door. I put the padlock back on. I put the iron bar back. And I understood why my grandfather had reinforced that door with an iron bar running from wall to wall. It was not to keep anyone from going down. It was to keep anything from coming up. My grandfather had died 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks with no one going down to the basement. 3 weeks with no one opening the door, no one putting the padlock back, no one checking the iron bar. 3 weeks during which what lived on the other side of the second crack had not received what it was used to receiving. 3 weeks of hunger or waiting or whatever it is, something feels that has been fed for 40 years by a man now dead and buried in a cemetery 3 kilometers from a country house, with a basement connecting to something that should not exist under a hill of oaks and chestnut trees in a village where people disappeared. But when I put the iron bar back, I noticed something that made my hands shake so much. I took 3 tries to fit the iron into the wall ring. The bar was bent, not broken, not cut, not worn, bent outward toward the kitchen, with the curvature that comes from constant pressure applied from the other side of the door, by something pushing every night against an iron bar that grows a little more bent each year, and that one day will not hold. I moved to the neighborhood on a Friday in September with 3 cardboard boxes and a suitcase, and the feeling that I was starting something new that would be better than what I was leaving behind. The apartment was small but had light and was on a quiet street in a neighborhood I did not know. One I had chosen because the rent was cheap and because sometimes the best thing you can do when your life needs a change is to move somewhere no one knows you, where you can start from scratch without the weight of people who know who you are and expect you to keep being who you were. The building had 4 floors. I was on the second. The entrance was old with tiles from another century and an elevator that worked sometimes, and that when it did not work forced you to take the stairs, which were narrow and dark and smelled of dampness and of food from the apartment seeping under the doors and mixing in the stairwell, creating a smell that was not unpleasant, but strange. A smell that changed depending on which floor you passed, and that told you what each neighbor was cooking without your having to ask. I saw her the first day. I was carrying boxes up the stairs because the elevator was not working, and when I reached the second floor and stopped to catch my breath, the door of the apartment across the landing opened. Not all the way. It opened just enough for a face to appear in the gap between the door and the frame. An old woman's face, very old, skin wrinkled in a way that was not the way skin wrinkles when people age normally, but the way skin wrinkles when people have lived longer than skin can endure without breaking. Small dark eyes sunk in their sockets like 2 black stones at the bottom of 2 wells. White hair pulled back in a tight bun that pulled the skin of her forehead backward and gave her face a tension that made her expression hard to read because the wrinkles pulled in one direction and the bun pulled in another, and the result was a face expressing nothing specific but everything at once. She looked at me. She looked at me for 5 seconds without saying anything. 5 seconds in which her small dark eyes traveled up and down me with the attention of someone evaluating what is before them, deciding whether they like it, or do not like it, or do not care. She did not greet me. She did not say welcome to the building or ask if I needed help with the boxes, or do any of the things neighbors do when someone moves into the apartment across the landing. She looked at me for 5 seconds and closed the door without a sound, with the softness of someone who closes doors without anyone hearing them close. The second time I saw her was 3 days later. I was going down the stairs to go to work at 8 in the morning, and when I passed her door, the door opened. The same gap, the same face, the same small dark eyes. But this time she spoke. She said my name, my full name, first and last. She said it with perfect pronunciation, no accent or hesitation or the uncertainty of someone reading a name on a mailbox and repeating it without knowing if they are saying it correctly. She said it like someone who has known that name for a long time and has said it many times and knows exactly how it sounds and how to pronounce each syllable. I stopped on the stairs. I asked her how she knew my name. She did not answer. She closed the door. I stood on the landing for 10 seconds looking at the closed door with the feeling that something I could not explain had just happened, and the most logical explanation was that she had read my name on the mailbox in the entrance, where I had stuck a label with my name and apartment number the day I moved in. That was it. She had read my name on the mailbox. That explained she knew my name. It did not explain she knew my last name, because on the mailbox I had only put my first name and the initial of my last name. But she could have deduced it. She could have asked the landlord. She could have looked it up online. There were rational explanations for an elderly neighbor knowing my full name 3 days after I moved into the building. I went down the stairs. I went to work. I tried not to think about the neighbor. I tried not to think about her small dark eyes or the way she had said my name with a familiarity that did not belong to two people who did not know each other and lived in apartments separated by a landing and a closed door. But that night when I came back from work and went up the stairs and past her door, the door did not open. And the silence behind the door was a silence that weighed more than the normal silence of an apartment where someone lives, that has the warm silence of inhabited places. The silence of her apartment was cold. It was the silence of places where there is someone, but where that someone does not make noise because they do not need to make noise to be there. 1 week after I moved in, I stopped sleeping. Not all at once. It was not that one night I got into bed and could not sleep. It was gradual. It was like a tide going out centimeter by centimeter, unnoticed until you look at where the water was and the water is no longer there. The first night I slept 6 hours instead of the 8 I normally slept. The second night I slept 5. The third 4. The fourth 3.5 hours that I spent staring at the bedroom ceiling with my eyes open, and my brain working at a speed that was not the normal speed of a brain at 3 in the morning, but the speed of a brain being forced to stay awake by something that needed it to stay awake. Each night I lost an hour of sleep, as if someone was closing a faucet controlling how much sleep my body could have, closing it a little more each night until the faucet would be completely closed and I would not be able to sleep at all. And when I did not sleep, I saw things, not hallucinations, not the things people see when they have gone days without sleeping and start seeing shadows in corners and lights that do not exist and shapes moving in the periphery of their vision. I saw real things, things that were in my room and should not be in my room, things that appeared when I closed my eyes and disappeared when I opened them. I closed my eyes and saw my room, but not my room as it was, but my room as it would be if someone had emptied it of everything that was mine and filled it with things that were not mine. Old dark wood furniture, heavy fabric curtains, a crucifix on the wall, lit candles on a table that was not my table, and in the corner of the room, sitting in a chair that was not my chair, the neighbor, with her small dark eyes looking at me from the corner of a room that was my room but was not. Because what I saw when I closed my eyes was not the present, but something older than the present, belonging to a time when my room was another room, and my apartment was another apartment, and the building was another building, or was not a building but a house where the neighbor lived before the building existed. I opened my eyes. My room was my room, my furniture, my bed, my lamp, no crucifix, no candles, no chair in the corner, no neighbor, everything normal. I closed my eyes. The old room returned. The neighbor returned, sitting in the chair, looking at me, her lips moving as if she were saying something I could not hear, because what she said was not a sound, but something below sound, entering my head by a path that was not my ears. I went to talk to the other neighbors. The one on the first floor was a young man who had moved in a year ago, and told me the neighbor on the second floor did not speak to anyone, and he had never seen her leave her apartment, and sometimes he heard noises coming from her apartment at night. Not loud noises, but murmuring, as if she were talking to someone or praying or reciting something she repeated over and over, with the cadence of someone saying the same words each night in the same order and with the same rhythm. The one on the third floor was a woman about 50 years old, who had lived in the building for 20 years, and who looked at me with an expression that was not curiosity, but concern when I asked about the neighbor. She told me to be careful. She told me the neighbor had been in the building longer than anyone, and no one knew exactly how long because no one remembered a time when the neighbor was not there. She told me the tenants who lived on the second floor did not last long. She told me that before me, there had been a man who left after 3 months without telling anyone where he was going. And before that man, a couple who left after 2 months. And before the couple, a woman alone who left after 6 weeks. They all left. They all left without warning and without leaving an address and without answering messages from neighbors who asked why they had left. I asked her if she knew why they left. She looked at me with the expression of someone who knows the answer but does not want to say it because saying it would make it real. and real things are scarier than things that are only suspicions. She told me they left because they could not sleep. She told me everyone who had lived on the second floor stopped sleeping after the first week. She told me the lack of sleep changed them, made them irritable and paranoid, and made them see things that were not there and hear things no one else heard. She told me at first it seemed like normal insomnia, but then it became something different that was not insomnia, but something that kept them awake on purpose, something that needed them to be awake to do what it did with them during the nights they did not sleep. I asked her what it did with them. She said she did not know. She said what she knew was that the tenants on the second floor changed. They changed the way they spoke, and the way they walked, and the way they looked. They grew slower and quieter and more like people who are there but not fully there, like people sleepwalking with their eyes open. And after a few weeks like that, they left. They left at night without making noise and without taking anything, and the apartment would be empty the next day with the previous tenants' things still inside, as if they had left without a suitcase and without clothes, and without anything except the body they were wearing. That night I went down to the entrance. I looked at the mailboxes. The mailbox for the second floor left. The neighbor's apartment had no name. It had never had a name. The label was blank. A yellowed rectangle of paper stuck to the metal of the mailbox, empty as if no one had ever lived there, or as if whoever lived there did not need a name, because names are for people who receive letters and exist in records and have an identity that can be verified, and what lived on the second floor left had none of those things. I looked at the mailbox more closely. The yellowed paper of the label was older than the papers on the other mailboxes. Not a little older, but much older. It was cracked and discolored with the texture of paper that has been exposed to the air and dampness of an entrance for decades, and that no one has changed, because no one has thought to change it, or because the person living behind that mailbox does not want anyone to change it, because a mailbox with no name is an invisible mailbox, and being invisible is what you need when what you do cannot be seen. I went up to my apartment. I passed her door, and this time the gap did not just open, but the door opened all the way, and the neighbor stood in the doorway with her whole body visible for the first time. She was shorter than she had seemed when I only saw her face through the gap. Thinner, with her hands at her sides and long bony fingers hanging from her wrists, with the inertia of things that are heavy and lack the strength to lift themselves. She wore a black dress that reached her feet, the kind of dress people have not worn for a century. A shapeless dress with no adornment and nothing distinguishing it from a piece of black cloth wrapped around a body that was more bone than flesh. She looked at me. She said my name again, first and last. And after my name, she said something else. She said a sentence in a language that was not Spanish or English or French or any language I could recognize. A short sentence of 4 or 5 words that sounded like stones falling into a well, each word heavier than the last, each syllable darker than the last, with a resonance that was not the normal resonance of words people say in building hallways at 11 at night, but the resonance of words spoken with intention, words carrying something inside that was not meaning, but force. The way she said them was not the way people speak, but the way people recite, with the rhythm of something repeated 1,000 times, coming out of the mouth without effort, because the mouth knows the words better than the brain, and because the words have their own path from throat to air, and do not need anyone to guide them. I felt the sentence. I did not understand it, but I felt it. I felt it like a blow to the chest delivered by no one, leaving me breathless for a second. I felt it in my knees, which bent 0.5 centimeter. I felt it in my hands, which clenched into fists without my ordering them to. I felt it in the back of my neck, where something neither cold nor hot but somewhere between settled with the weight of a hand someone places on your neck and does not remove. The neighbor closed the door. I stood on the landing with the sensation in my neck and the echo of the words I did not understand, bouncing inside my head with the insistence of a melody that repeats and that you cannot stop. I entered my apartment. I locked the door. I sat on the sofa, and the words kept sounding inside my head. The 4 or 5 words the neighbor had said in the language I did not recognize, repeated with a rhythm that was not my rhythm, but the rhythm of someone reciting something, needing what they recite to repeat a specific number of times to work. I did not sleep that night. I did not sleep because every time I closed my eyes, I saw the old room with the dark furniture and the candles and the crucifix, and the neighbor sitting in the corner with her lips moving, saying the same words she had said to me on the landing, words that now sounded louder inside my head, and that had an effect that was not auditory but physical. An effect felt in the bones and muscles and in the blood moving slower through the veins, as if the blood was thickening with each repetition of the words the neighbor said without stopping from the corner of a room that existed inside my closed eyes. In the morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. I had dark circles. I had red eyes. I had the face of someone who has not slept all night. But there was something more. Something that was not tiredness or dark circles or red eyes. Something in the expression of my face that had changed during the night. As if the neighbor's sentence had moved the muscles of my face 0.5 millimeter in a direction they had not been before, making my expression slightly different from my expression of yesterday without my being able to point to exactly what had changed. I went to work. I tried to function normally. I tried to talk to my coworkers and answer emails and do the things I do each day at work. But the neighbor's words kept sounding inside my head at a volume that was not loud but was constant, preventing me from concentrating on anything other than the sound of those 4 or 5 words repeating again and again and again, like a broken record playing the same phrase without stopping. A coworker asked if I was okay. I said yes. He said I seemed distracted. I said I had not slept well. He said to go home if I was not feeling well. I did not go home. I did not go home because home was where the neighbor was, and the neighbor was what had done this to me, and going home was going back to where the words had been spoken, where the words had more power than anywhere else. But I went back. I went back because I had nowhere else to go, and because a rental apartment is what you have when you have nothing else, and because the alternative to going back was sleeping on the street, and sleeping on the street was not an option for someone who could no longer sleep anywhere. I went up the stairs. I passed the neighbor's door. The door was closed. It did not open. I did not see her face. I did not hear her voice. But behind the door I heard something. A murmur. The same murmur the first-floor neighbor told me he heard at night. A murmur that was the same words the neighbor had said to me. Words that now sounded not only inside my head, but also behind her door, as if she were repeating them at the same time they repeated inside me, creating a resonance between the two sources that made the words vibrate more strongly, and the sensation in my neck grow heavier, and the blood thicken a little more. I entered my apartment. I closed the door. I sat on the bed. I closed my eyes. The old room appeared, the neighbor in the corner, her lips moving, the words repeating. But this time there was something different. This time the neighbor was not sitting in the chair. She was standing in front of me, closer than before, 1 meter away. Her small dark eyes fixed on mine and her lips moving without stopping, saying the words that were now so loud inside my head I could hear nothing else. And her hands were no longer at her sides. Her hands were raised in front of her with her long bony fingers extended toward me, as if reaching for something just out of reach, something needing me to come a little closer so she could touch it. I opened my eyes. My room, my bed, my things, normal. But the sensation in my neck was heavier, and the words inside my head were louder, and my face in the bathroom mirror was a little less my face than the night before. Eyes a little more sunken, expression a little emptier, gaze a little more like the gaze of someone who is there but not fully there. I called the third-floor neighbor. I asked her how long the second-floor tenants took to leave. She told me between 6 weeks and 3 months, depending on the person. I asked what it depended on. She told me it depended on how much they resisted. That some resisted more than others, but that in the end they all left because what the second-floor neighbor did could not be resisted, and because each night you did not sleep what she had put inside, you grew and became stronger and took up more space until what you were was less than what she had put inside you, and at that moment, you stopped being you and left. Or something that looked like you left with your body to a place no one knew, a place no one would ever know because those who left did not return. And those who did not return did not tell where they had gone. That night I packed 3 cardboard boxes and a suitcase, the same 3 boxes and the same suitcase I had arrived with 2 weeks earlier. I filled them with my things. I carried them down the stairs. I put them in the car, and when I was closing the trunk I heard something behind me. A murmur. the murmur of the words that had been sounding inside my head for 2 weeks. I turned. The neighbor was in the entrance doorway, standing, in the black dress with her small dark eyes and her lips moving with the words I could almost understand now, because I had heard them so many times that the unknown language was beginning to make sense inside my head, as if my brain was learning the language without my permission, and as if each repetition was a lesson bringing me closer to the moment when I would understand what the words said, and when I understood what the words said, the words would complete what they had begun. I got in the car. I started the engine. I left. I drove for an hour without direction, and without destination, and without knowing where I was going, because the only thing I knew was that I had to get away from the building, and from the neighbor, and from the words sounding inside my head. I drove until the building was a point in the rearview mirror, and then a street, and then a neighborhood, and then an area of the city lost among the lights of the other areas of the city. I stopped at a rest area. I turned off the engine. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the steering wheel and my eyes closed, and the words kept sounding. Quieter than in the building, but still there. They had not stayed in the building. They had come with me. They were inside my head, and inside my head they would be wherever I went, because what the neighbor had put inside me was not in the building or the neighborhood or the city, but inside me. And what is inside you goes with you wherever you go and does not stay behind when you move, because you cannot move away from yourself. I opened my eyes. I looked at the rearview mirror, and in the back seat of the car, which had been empty when I got in, there was something. It was not the neighbor. It was not a person. It was a shadow with the shape of someone sitting in the back seat with hands in their lap and head slightly tilted forward and eyes not visible but felt, because the shadow was looking at me from the back seat of my car with the patience of something that knows it does not need to hurry because it is already inside, and because what is inside does not leave, and because the words sounding in my head will keep sounding until my brain finishes learning them, and until I understand what they say, and until what they say is completed, and until I stop being me, the same way the other second-floor tenants stopped being them and left at night without a suitcase and without clothes to a place no one knows, with something inside their heads they did not have before, and that now they cannot remove, because what the neighbor puts inside cannot be removed, and what the neighbor says cannot be forgotten, and what the neighbor starts cannot be stopped.